Hawaii's livestock industry is in jeopardy. A new invasive species has arrived, and it is killing important grasses that are vital to Hawaii. The two-lined spittlebug is a pest that is considered the most destructive insect pest to pasture.
The extent to which the spittlebug has spread, it's over 170,000 acres already on the Big Island. It's very unlikely, I think I could even say safely, probably impossible, that we're going to get rid of this bug.
My name is Kaia Wall. I'm from Wall Ranch. We're located in Kona. We started our ranch in 1941. I see places that my grandpa, my great-grandpa worked so hard in creating these nice pastures and these great grazing lands. And then to see it all go in a matter of years is so hard, and just knowing that it might not ever get back to where it was, and the destruction is so great in such a small amount of time, that I think my generation is the one that's going to be cleaning up this mess of this little bug. One of the most saddest things is of Mauka, when we would go up there and we would see a pasture hit. It looks like someone rounded up the grass, and you would walk through the grass that's about this high, and you would kick it and it would just fly in the air, and it's like someone rounded up your whole pasture. It was brought up to everyone's attention in 2016, but we were seeing it in 2015 and possibly 2014. I was the first one to notice it. We thought it was the webworm, but then when I started digging, I found the spittlebugs, and I took it to the research station, and then they identified it. So that was in 2016. We were seeing it a year before that at about 1,500 feet. That's where it started, and that was the epicenter. And then from there, it kind of just got out of control. And so every year around mid-year, we would see the patches increase and the weeds increase, because the spittlebug would come, wipe out the grass, the weeds would come in, the pigs would also dig it up, so no grass could come back. And then ever since then, we've just been fighting a lot of weeds. It spread up to the top of our ranch. So right now in 2020, we've finally hit. It's been 100% affected. Places that we've never seen hit before were hit finally this year. So we have been totally infested. It took about 6 years for it to cover our whole ranch. We've cut back our herd 50% due to the spittlebug, and we're still decreasing our herd. We're just culling all our cows, and we're not putting any replacements up, and we haven't put replacements up for a few years. So our herd is thinning out, and it's due to the loss of grass and the increase of weeds, and it's looking like we're still gonna have to keep decreasing. We won't get back to 100% for about 10 more years. We're only the first ranch to be affected, so we're 6 years in, but the people north or south of us, they're only on their first year, and it's just gonna get worse.
If anyone is going to figure this out, it's the ranchers, especially the people on the ground and those that are working together with the researchers.
I'm out there every single day for the last 6 years, and I still don't know how to get rid of this thing, and it's very frustrating.
My name is Sarah Moore. I'm one of the ranch managers here at Kaia Ranch. Our cow herd relies exclusively on our Mauka pastures that are basically kukuya grass pastures with some pangola and other interspersed other grass species, but primarily kukuya grass.
The two-lined spittlebug really likes kikuyu grass, and kikuyu grass is very vulnerable to two-lined spittlebug damage.
About 2015, I attended a workshop, and Mark Thorne was a speaker there, and he presented to us that he had discovered a pest in South Kona that was called the two-lined spittlebug. And it was a pasture pest that was damaging the forages of South Kona, primarily in the Kainaliu areas, the ranches, Mauka ranches there. He approached the ranch for us to be a survey site for his research, because he wanted to know where the southern extent boundary of the spread of this insect pest. And so we agreed to have his crew come once a month and run transects on the ranch. So I took him up on the ranch, and we went to 4 different sites. At the time, I thought, we won't find it here, and we'll just be part of his research. Lo and behold, one day he was running a transect, and I think it was in spring of 2017. He found one dead adult spittlebug on transect number 1, which was at 3,000 feet. And I didn't believe him. We continued with the transects. We did not find much damage. I didn't think much about it, that it would have an impact on the ranch, and so we just went along in 2016. Well, come 2017, there were more. There were more adults at this transect. There were more nymphs. He was finding prevalence of the two-lined spittlebug on Kaia Ranch. But I still didn't worry about it because it was only at that one elevation. It wasn't hitting our primary pastures, our beautiful kukuya grass pastures. For 2017, 2018, we were seeing more insects. And what slowly happened, and this is why I didn't worry about it too much, is I wasn't seeing the classic dieback. I wasn't seeing the kukuya look dead, like somebody had sprayed it with herbicides and weeds coming up. It was a slow transition of the grasses so that everything stayed green, but it wasn't till early this year and the end of last year that I realized what was going on. The good forages were dying back, the kukuya and the pangola, and what was taking its place was carpet grass and rat tail and weeds. I think it was the beginning of this year, 2020, that I realized the extent of our infestation. We started seeing spittlebugs up at the 4,000 foot elevation, up by our working pens. It was still on the north side of the ranch, so I wasn't too worried, but I was seeing this transition of grasses. Normally, we have a dieback of the forages in the fall through the winter, and then in the spring, the kukuya comes back very lush and green. What was happening is there was the suppression of the forage grasses in the fall, but the spring, it wasn't coming back. All of a sudden, my eyes opened to the extent of what was going on, because as the insect pest moved into the higher elevations, we started seeing this classic dieback. There was this carpet grass invasion coming and moss, but then as we went higher, we would see these dead spots. And so I took a tour around the south side of the ranch. I invited Hawai'i Wall to come with me because I knew he had a lot of experience on what the first stages of an infestation are on a ranch. And he came with me and he was like, yep, yep, this is it. I think it was about July of 2020, this year, that my heart really sank. And I realized that this is going to change our lives forever. You know, Roy's dad, Alan Wall, has ranched here in South Kona for years and generations. And I saw him about 2 years ago, and he told me at that time, he said, this is going to be the worst thing that ever happens to ranching in South Kona. And I was like, really? You know, we've had the yellow sugarcane aphid, we've had other, pests and problems, and he was convinced that this was going to change ranching in Kona. And it was up until this year, it took 2 to 3 years for me to really believe him and for it to sink in and for me to say that my life as a rancher is going to change forever from this insect. We've worked long and hard on our genetics, on our breeding programs, on our marketing, but none of that is going to matter if I don't have the forage to finish these cattle. We've had other influences to agriculture and ranching, but I think this two-lined spittlebug might top them all. So it brought to mind like a whole lot of factors. Downsizing the herd. I'm not going to be able to finish as many cattle. We usually market 350 calves a year. Probably have to cut that down by at least 2/3. But the biggest thing is, how are we going to change our forage on this ranch? So I called Mark Thorne and I thanked him for being so persistent, because he's been talking to us for 5 years, telling us, that this is coming, it's coming, and until it started really hitting me that hard, I wasn't taking it seriously. So I thanked him for being so persistent and for his diligent work in trying to get the research and get forages out to us. And I said to him, Mark, I believe you now, and I need help.
I think in that first season, it's going to be really hard for a lot of people to really understand that they're under attack, unless they're just out there being extremely vigilant and being aware of things that look out of place. These little dead patches will be in a nice green patch of grass. So yeah, it is deceiving in that sense, and you have to really be on top of it.
We met on the mountain up on Kaia Ranch, Roy and Mark and I and his Spittlebug crew, and we talked about the future of Kaia Ranch and what it's going to take. Roy was a wealth of information, because he said, you know, you're at the point that I was at 2 years ago, and I feel like I have been proactive and I'm going to come out of this. So he gave me hope, because I was pretty much in despair. So he gave me hope, but he said, you got to start now, and you got to start throwing seed wherever you can. You got to start carrying seed every day you go up on the ranch. You got to put it in your saddlebag. You can't give up. And I said, okay, we'll try and we'll get through this. And then in the spring, we will make a plan to become grass farmers and seed planters. And so we talked with our crew here, talked about ways that we can start just spreading as much seed as we can and try to get ahead of the devastation that is coming.
Ranchers are being faced with losing a huge portion of their productive capacity, which forces them to have to reduce their herd, which reduces the amount of income that they can generate on their ranch, while at the same time they're facing massive costs to fight the bug, to try to restore pastures to desirable forages again, and to battle the invasive weeds that come in where two-lined spittlebug has brought its devastation.
When the two-lined spittlebug invades into a new area, those infestations start off as small patches scattered across the landscape. Usually they go undetected. In that first season, the first summer two-lined spittlebug season, those patches can grow. We'll see a few more crop up. The nymph densities stay fairly low. Usually by the first time that they become noticeable, you know, the spittlebug populations are somewhere around maybe 10 to 15 nymphs per square meter. And at that point, there's just only marginal effect on the grass. We're not getting large die-offs. It's just secluded to these small patches. By the second generation of adults, though, that population will have increased, say, around 30 to 35 nymphs per square meter. From that, you start to see the grass population decline. So every season, we get about 2 adult generations, and then they go into diapause.
Diapause just means it's a dormant season. It's a time of the year when the bugs, their activity goes way, way down.
So winter time, we just get this kind of background activity, a few nymphs, a few adults, but never anything extremely heavy. I think what that tells us is that, you know, we just don't have anything over winter that causes any kind of die-off of the eggs that are in diapause. Like a good hard freeze on the mainland would kill a lot of eggs. So the consequence of not having any die-off over the winter is that the first outbreak of nymphs and the subsequent adult population is exponentially greater than what we saw in the last adult population. So if we had nymphs at 35 nymphs per square meter, the next outbreak is going to be somewhere around 80 or 90 nymphs per square meter. That's when we start to see this dramatic die-off of the kikuyu grass in particular. That's in year 2, and so it's just very dramatic. And then the second generation after that is even higher. We've seen anywhere over 60 nymphs per square meter up to 200 nymphs per square meter in that second generation. And of course, those, when I say nymphs, the nymphs are precursors to that adult generation. It's adult generation that kills the grass. Anything under about 50 nymphs per square meter, the kikuyu grass is not going to be heavily impacted. It's going to be suppressed, but it's not going to be killed off. When we reach that 50 nymphs per square meter, 50 or 60 nymphs per square meter, that's sort of this threshold in which the population becomes critical, and you get this rapid die-off, this catastrophic die-off of the grass. And when you lose that kikuyu grass cover, right, all kinds of weeds are going to get started. The first one that typically comes in, especially in those mid-elevation, that 3,000 to 4,000 foot elevation for kikuyu grass. The first one that comes in is fireweed, and it can be extremely aggressive. And we've seen at the end of the second year, less than 2% kikuyu grass cover and 98% fireweed cover. The following years after that, though, you start to see a transition. The balloon plant, mare's tail, which comes in and makes like a forest. In some places it could be, the blackberry, Himalayan raspberry. Pomacani comes in some places just thick as you can imagine.
Just to give you an idea of the scale that this is going to probably get to, you can see how this blackberry is becoming a thicker and thicker and taller bramble climbing up against this ohia tree. As this type of cover spreads and covers this landscape more and more, it really limits the ability to use this land for anything. Livestock production, recreational use, even other forestry ventures would be very, very challenged by having to deal with this kind of vegetation out here on this landscape.
The weeds that are invading these pastures after the spittlebug does its damage are the worst weeds. They're the ones that they're aggressive, they grow really fast, they put out a lot of seed and fruit, and they're very difficult to eradicate.
Here we can kind of see a bigger picture of what the spittlebug is doing to this landscape. These were rolling hills of kikuyu grass that you are accustomed to seeing in our upcountry Hawaii landscapes, and it's been completely transformed to landscape of invasive species. There's really not a lot out there that's edible for livestock at all. It's a lot of blackberry, a lot of pomacani, and a lot of toxic fireweed.
The terrain here in South Kona, there's no way you can take machinery and equipment out. I mean, we talked about spraying the hot spots. To me, it's like, I don't know, taking a hose and trying to put out a huge fire. It's like a huge fire. And I only have a garden hose.
Right now, we're nowhere near stopping this thing. It's moving at about 35,000 acres a year. I mean, when it gets into an area, like I said, right now it's catastrophic. If it gets into this Waimea Plain out here and affects Parker Ranch, Kahua, and Punaholo Ranch, I mean, those are the three largest ranches we have. They control 65% of the cattle in the state. It would be economically devastating. The cattle industry in the state would just almost evaporate because of that.
I think worst case scenario, if it was particularly in this Kohala Mountain and Mauna Kea grazing areas, which, it's some of the most productive grazing land on the planet. If it has a significant impact in these areas and about this probably 30-40 mile radius here, it could really, at least in the short term, really decimate the ranching industry and, well, the grazing industry, not just cattle, but other grazing species as well. I think it would cause a lot of hardship and probably put a lot of producers out of business, whether they're full-time ranchers or, family ranches or Hawaiian Homes ranches. It could be a very significant impact or the demise of a lot of businesses, I think.
If it starts spreading statewide, the whole industry is going to have some issues. You're talking about a huge loss of production, and it's something that really needs to be controlled. It would affect a lot of people.
Fortunately, we don't have it here on this part of the island yet, but it's a really concerning pest, particularly with our huge reliance on kikuyu grass. I do know that it's very destructive to kikuyu and pangola pastures. It's extremely troubling to know that a pest that is as destructive to those species is here. I try to be an optimist, but at the same time, my gut tells me, and with the experts on it, that it's kind of it's not if, it's when it gets here.
God forbid it gets to one of the other islands. Right now, as far as we know, it's not on Maui, not on Kauai. We got to keep it out of those islands. But if it gets into this area, it could be just economically catastrophic for the cattle industry. I fear for that. This is not a rancher problem. This is a statewide problem. This is the state's problem. They got to be treating it like the rapid ohia death. It's that critical. It's that important. They need to be pumping money into this. They need to help the ranchers deal with this.
If this deal really hits this side of the island, we gonna need all the help we can get.
When the populations are low in that first year of impact, I think grazing management is going to be the key.
We realized that we have to start changing the way that we ranch and the way that I was taught to ranch, that my dad was taught to ranch, that we were all traditionally taught. We have to change that way.
And the only solution I can see, and the long-term solution for the islands here, is to come in with varieties of grasses that are spittlebug resistant.
The university is trying to find grasses that are resistant, that have the dry matter and have the protein too. And so the research that they're doing is going to be the most important thing for the ranchers here right now, to find forages that we can put out at what elevations, in what climates, and the amount of spittlebug resistance that they actually have with a good germination rate in our conditions. Getting it so that they reseed themselves. So we need forages that will then naturalize.
If you know it's gonna come, and if I were you, I would get these recommended seeds and find the right grasses that work for you, that are spittlebug resistant, so that by the time it hits you, you're ready and prepared to spread that seed. Everyone thinks they can battle it, but when it comes to you, there's no way you can battle it. These bugs, they fly. I've seen them fly far. It's very hard to control, and it's very unrealistic to go and spray pesticide on these little tiny bugs because they're a little nymph that grows inside of the spit mass, and it's so hard to penetrate that spit mass that you cannot poison this thing, and it's very hard. I would recommend find that right grass that works for you, because what works for us is not going to be what works for the next ranch down the road. And then when it comes, be ready to plant that seed, because there's no stopping the bug.
Seeding is going to be the key, and I don't want to waste. Seed is expensive. Some of the other ranches that are already impacted, the budget that they have set aside to buy seed is pretty phenomenal.
When they're starting to lose hundreds, if not thousands of acres of pasture, that adds up in dollars to tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in grass seed and labor to try to restore. They're going to need help.
Funding to help ranchers buy seed, I think, is going to be the most important thing that we could ask, and the appropriate seeds. So the research is going to need to back that up. So yes, we're going to need to be buying seed, but like I said, you don't want to waste that seed on something that isn't appropriate or doesn't work. So the research that the university is doing right now needs to continue to be funded extensively to back up the money that is then put out on the land.
It's definitely changing the landscape, and I think you should be careful when you're going out of your own zone, you know, with trucks, because everyone drives their Polaris everywhere, take their truck everywhere, take their boots everywhere. But it's not just the spittlebug. It's going to be the next thing. It's the ohia wilt. So there's always a chance of spreading something. So I would say just be careful of where you go, what you do, because it's not just about this bug. There's always going to be that one thing that is going to be affecting us. So as long as we're aware of it, then I think that's the biggest thing.
If I had to have one take-home message about the two-lined spittlebug, it is a pest that will affect a lot of different communities on the island. It will affect the growers, the ranchers. It'll affect the people who are trying to restore these ranch lands.
I cannot emphasize more strongly just how important it is that Hawaii really improve its biosecurity. We cannot afford to lose inspectors and have shipments coming in with these hidden pests anymore. Every pest that comes in increases the amount of money that we have to spend then managing the impacts of these pests. We can't keep doing this and think that it's somehow gonna get easier. We can't keep doing this and think that we're not gonna see dramatic impacts to our agricultural capability. Every time a new pest gets in that needs to be managed, the cost of growing food here goes up, and the market can't always keep up with that, which is why we end up importing more and more food, because other places can grow it cheaper. We keep talking about food sustainability, but we aren't making the connections to the parts of the system that are threatening that food sustainability. We are not recognizing that there are these serious weaknesses in our overall processes and posture here in Hawaii that make us extremely vulnerable, especially our food security. They all come in through our imports. I know that the state has been working hard to improve the plan, but we have to do more. It has to be a priority. We live in a place where the climate allows us to grow things year-round, but if we get run over with every worst pest out there, it won't matter because the pests like it here too. If we don't improve our biosecurity, the future of agriculture in Hawaii gets bleaker and bleaker every day.
Hawaii's livestock industry is an extremely valuable industry on all major islands with an estimated value of over $68 million annually. The industry has over 140,000 cattle on more than 1,200 ranches on close to 1 million acres across the state, which is about 25% of the state landmass. The industry serves as an economic engine for the state and, more importantly, is an important component of our island's food security. The industry also supports communities of diverse farm workers. It is a heartbeat of the Paniolo culture and provides land management on important watershed areas and scenic vistas that give us all a sense of open landscapes and agrarian community that support the beauty and function of our island home.